Well, hey there. Good to see you here on the YouTube. Brett here, getting ready to work through your small group content with you. If you're leading a small group for Dayspring, an off-campus small group on the week of November the 15th, and this video is designed to help you get ready to do that. Now, if you teach on a Sunday morning an on-campus small group, there's a different video for you, so you might want to back up and find that one. But if you're going to be facilitating a small group off-campus on the week of November the 15th using this guide here, then this video is designed to help you get ready to do that. So grab your copy of it. I'm going to walk through it with you and give you some things to think about as you get ready to facilitate your group this upcoming week, okay? Now, this small group guide, as always, serves as a little bit of a follow-up or really a complement to the message that you and your group are going to hear on Sunday. The message you and your group are going to hear Sunday comes from a guest speaker, our church planting partner up in New Jersey, and he's going to be teaching through something that happened in the life of Jesus, where Jesus took some loaves and fishes and multiplied those. So our guest speaker is going to be talking about how God, there's sometimes we have things in our hands, and Jesus asks for them and wants them, and he's doing that for the purpose of bringing glory to himself. And so it's up to us to release what we have in our hands, which is a difficult thing. I think of all the blind spots that we have in terms of how we follow Jesus, I think the greatest blind spot that we have is our possessions, is our relationship to our stuff. I think many times we don't realize that our possessions really have a grip on us, and it's kind of part of living in a rich culture like America. We don't realize sometimes that God is calling us to let go of things, and it's easy for us to talk ourselves into keeping them. And I think sometimes we even make it sound spiritual. So this small group guide is a follow-up to that kind of a conversation. So it talks a lot about our possessions and our stuff. Now, look at it with me. Discussion point number 1, you're going to read the passage that our guest preacher is going to teach us through, and that's going to spur on some conversation with you and your group about what you heard Sunday, and you'll talk about that. And by the way, if you skip discussion point number 1, you're going to kind of shortchange your group and kind of mess things up in terms of how good the conversation can go. So always start off with number 1 and talk about what you heard, what you learned, because this really does get the ball rolling and really does set the stage for where you're going to go from here, okay? Discussion point number 2, this is where it's going to kind of guide you into the content of this discussion guide, all right? It says a lot of factors go into the choices we make, but ultimately we make decisions based on how it will affect what's most important to us. And then it asks you the questions, what are those most important factors for you? And really what it's asking here is this: when you have a decision to make, a kind of a big life decision, you're going to weigh in, how is this going to affect this? And how is it going to affect that? And how is it going to affect this? And typically, you're going to make a decision based on the priorities of all of those various things in your lives, okay? So this is just kind of a discussion starter. What are those really important factors for you? And if you can tell your group is not tracking with the question, throw out a hypothetical situation. You know, say, okay, well, let's put it like this. If you were offered a brand new job out of town, what factors would determine whether or not you do that? And see, and there you learn what someone's personal priorities are. Are their priorities staying close to certain people where you already live? Is their priority advancement in their career and maybe making more money? You know, different people have different priorities with those things. So you're just asking the question, what are the really important factors for you when it comes to making decisions? And then from there, you're going to flow into your Bible content. Look at discussion point number 3. It says, Jesus spoke strongly about how we should prioritize our priorities. And then you go on to read Matthew 6, verses 19 through 21. And I'm going to read these for you in case you don't have a Bible with you. Here are the verses you're going to start off reading in discussion point number 3. This is Jesus speaking. It says, do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust destroy and where thieves break in and steal. But rather store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where moth and rust do not destroy and where thieves do not break in and steal. Now you're going to read that and then just move directly into discussion point number 4. Look at that one with me. It says, was Jesus teaching that it's bad for a person to have lots of stuff? Or was he simply speaking about priorities? What is he getting at? And I would contend here that Jesus isn't saying that the person who has a lot of wealth is a bad person or has done a bad thing. All Jesus is saying here is that you have different degrees of priorities. You have earthly things and you have heavenly things. And what he's saying is it would be foolish to prioritize earthly things over heavenly things. It would be foolish to do that. And why would that be foolish? Think about it. Because earthly things are temporary. So why would you prioritize something that's not even permanent? It just doesn't make sense. Now that leads you on to discussion point number 5. So in discussion point number 4, you've simply asked that question. If he's talking about priorities, what's he getting at? And that's the answer. He's getting at it's really dumb to value a temporal thing over an eternal thing, something that you're just going to have for a little while over something that you're going to have for a long, long, long time. It doesn't make sense. So look at discussion point number 5. It says, think about the logic of Jesus' words. And here's the logic. How foolish is it to make a temporary thing your most cherished priority? Why put a top value on something that's going to go away? And I want you to think about this. There are all kinds of verses right here that maybe you as a group leader, you may kind of throw these out to reiterate the point that, temporary things, it's kind of really dumb to try and hold on to them like they're going to be with us forever, because they're really not. Here's some verses you might lean on or throw out there or read. Proverbs 23, verses 4 and 5. Check that one out and see if that doesn't really help you as a facilitator as your group is talking about valuing temporary things. Here are a couple of other great verses, and it's kind of a repeat verse, but Ecclesiastes chapter 5, verse 15. That's Ecclesiastes 5:15, or Job 1, verse 21. Those verses really say the same thing, so you could pick one or the other. But that's kind of a funny verse that says, we showed up into this world naked, we're going to leave naked. We brought nothing in with us, we're going to take nothing out with us. So just a reminder that all of the things that we accumulate and that we fall in love with, and sometimes even it becomes the priority in the decisions that we make, whether it's this thing here or that job out of town decision or whatever it may be. Sometimes the single greatest determination when it comes into play for us, or when everything comes into play, sometimes the single greatest determination for us comes down to material things. And Jesus is showing us, and the Bible is showing us over and over, don't make that a top priority because it doesn't make sense. Now look at a follow-up question there in discussion point number 5. He says, what can you name in this world that is not temporary? That's the follow-up question. What can you name in this world that is not temporary? And really, there's only 2 answers here, okay? Here they are. Number 1, my soul and your soul. That's it. My soul and the soul of other people, those are the only things in this world that do not just come and go and die and end up in the grave forever and ever. Everything else does. But souls are eternal. So look at the final question in discussion point number 5. It says, so then, what is Jesus telling us about right and correct life priorities and the decision making and the decisions that we make? What Jesus is telling us is this, is that when we are making decisions, the thing that ought to really rise to the top when we're saying, all right, this comes into play, this comes into play, this comes into play, the thing that really ought to come into play the most are the things that have to do with people. Because people possess the only thing that's going to go on forever and ever and ever. So that's really what discussion point number 5 is all about. And in verses 19 through 20 of your reading, that's what it's all about. And listen, on this one, don't forget the point that you're making. Don't lose the point and end up with a different point. Because it'll be easy during this discussion point here of number 5, it'd be easy to inadvertently communicate that what Jesus is saying is that having stuff is bad. That's not what he's saying. What he's saying is that to prioritize stuff over people, that's foolish and that is bad. All right, so that's really the first wave of your discussion here, is that it's foolish to prioritize earthly things because Jesus himself said, don't store up treasures down here, store them up there, because there are things that last forever and there are things that don't. That's the first wave of your discussion. The second wave comes here in discussion point number 6. Look at it. It says, now go on and read what Jesus said in the following verses 22 and 23. Let me read those for you. Jesus goes on. This is the same conversation. He says the eye is the lamp of the body, and if your eyes are good, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eyes are bad, your whole body will be full of darkness. And if then the light within you is darkness, how great is that darkness? Now, here's something you can explain to your group right here. Jesus is using some expressions that were common in his day, good eyes and bad eyes. And generally speaking, good eyes were a description of people who were generous, people who didn't value material things above people. Bad eyes that was a description of people who were selfish. And it was the idea that they wanted this and this and this and this and this, everything they laid their eyes on. So a good eye was somebody who really had a single focus on what was really important. People with bad eyes were people who they wanted everything, and they were greedy. So Jesus is talking here about material possessions. That makes sense in light of the verses that we just read where he says, store up treasures up there, not down here. Now, as you read those verses, and maybe you'll kind of remind everybody that good eyes means generous people, bad eyes means greedy people. From there you go into discussion point 7. Look at this. It says, one interesting principle we learn from Jesus' words here is this: that which captures our eyes will eventually capture our heart. Now that is a great statement, because listen again to what Jesus said. The eye is the lamp of the body. If your eyes are good, your whole body is going to be full of light. But if your eyes are bad, your whole self is going to be full of darkness. Where your eyes go, your heart eventually is going to go. Now, this kind of reminds me of something that I heard a lady say one time. She was talking about how she discovered she was very discontent with her home and her home furnishings and all of this. She just was constantly wanting to upgrade this and replace that. And then she said, I noticed that I was content with my stuff until she started watching a certain television show on HGTV, and until she discovered Pinterest. She said it wasn't until really I started watching that and looking at that consistently that all of a sudden I was wanting more and more. Now, as you think of her story, and that's an illustration that you can share. And it doesn't have to, and it's not that you've heard that person say it, but you've heard about that person now. So you could say at this point, when you read that statement, what captures our eyes will eventually capture our heart. You can say it's like the story that Brett shared with me one time about a lady who was discontent with her home and all that, and then realized it's what she had given her eyes to. She was fine until she set her eyes on this stuff all the time. Now, look at the follow-up question on discussion point number 7, because this is a really good one. It says, with this thought in mind, think through and talk about the following questions, and just read them one at a time. What is it that you consistently read or watch? With what do you seem to constantly lack contentment? And then the third question, could this principle from Jesus be in play? So think about that. At this point, you're just going to go around the group and say, what do you tend to watch a lot and read a lot? And then start seeing if there's a connection here. Could it be that I've just given my eyes to this thing, and now it's caused me to have bad eyes, to want, and to want to hold on to things and get things? Jesus taught this very important principle. He's already told us that we shouldn't prioritize material things. And now he's showing us, if you give your eyes to these things, it could be very much that you're going to develop some bad eyes. All right? Now there's a final question there on discussion point number 7. As you're talking about this, if this principle is coming into play for you, then what is the solution? And that should be an easy answer. All right? Your group should be able to work through that. You don't need my help on that one. Discussion point number 8 brings you to the third wave of your discussion. So the first wave is verses 19 through 21, where it says that we shouldn't prioritize earthly things over heavenly things. The wave number 2 is verses 22 and 23, where Jesus talks about not giving our eyes to stuff because that's going to mess up our priorities. Now the final wave, you read verse 24, and let me read it to you. He says, no one can serve two masters. Either he'll hate the one and love the other, or he'll be devoted to the one and despise the other. And now look at the last statement. You cannot serve both God and money. Now, when you read your Bible here, and maybe it depends on the translation you read, but what it ought to do for you is reflect what the original language reflects here. The word money is capitalized. You say, well, that's kind of weird. It says you cannot serve both God and money. Here's the reason why. When Matthew recorded Jesus' words here, it was spoken that way. Jesus used the term money like it was a proper name. So in other words, it would have sounded like this when he said it to his original crowd. You cannot serve God and Mr. Money. All right. So he's speaking about money like it's a person. Now look at what it says in discussion point number 9. It says Jesus makes it clear no one can have two top priorities. You can't top prioritize them both. You've got earthly things and heavenly things. Earthly things being Mr. Money, heavenly things being God. Now, in this verse, look at what it says. Jesus speaks of money with the proper name, Mr. Money. What is he implying by doing this? Jesus could have just said you can't serve both God and money, the thing money, but he says it more like you can't serve God and Mr. Money, the person money. Why does Jesus do this? Why does Jesus act as if money is a person? What are the implications there? Think about that for a moment. Well, here's what I would say. Jesus is showing us that money, how easy it is for money to do to us what really people can do. Think about it. Money can manipulate us. It can deceive us. It can control us like it is a living being, like it is a thing with a will. And I think Jesus is trying to show us that money is really different. Of all the things that we can prioritize, money has the ability to really possess us. That our possession, money, can actually possess us like it's a being or a person. So Jesus is making that point here, and I think that's a good teaching point there. That Jesus is trying to show us you can't have two top priorities because they're both going to demand things from you. They're both going to require things from you, and you can't serve them both. You're going to have to make a choice. And Jesus has already shown us that the right choice isn't temporary money, is going to die and go away. The right choice is that which is of heaven, God, and then secondly, underneath that, people, which really sounds like what Jesus taught us, doesn't it? When people said, Jesus, what is the most important thing? What's the most important commandment? Jesus said, God and people. Love God and love people. Now you'll notice here after discussion point number 9, there's really no wrap-up statement or something like that leads into your closing discussion point number 10, which is just a memory verse statement. So you might want to come up with something that segues from 9 to 10. Otherwise, it's going to be a real abrupt ending. Your group's going to be talking about things. You're going to be talking about Mr. Money. And then all of a sudden, you're going to go, all right, well, let's memorize our verse and move on. So you might want to kind of throw something out there that kind of wraps things up. And what I would recommend is a question. Throw this question out to each person. Just go around the group and just say, so in light of everything that we've looked at here in Matthew 6, what's your big takeaway, John? What's your big takeaway, Jane? Fred, what would you say is the big learning point here? Just kind of go around the group and let everybody wrap it up as a group and throw out this one big learning point and application. And then from there, you can move on to your closer, which is discussion point number 10, which is your memory verse for the week. And really that memory verse reiterates what you've already said in your lesson. Don't prioritize temporary stuff. You're born without it. You're going to leave without it. Look at the memory verse. 1 Timothy chapter 6, verses 6 and 7. It says, godliness with contentment is great gain. For we brought nothing into the world. We can take nothing out of it. All right. So this is a really hearty small group discussion this week. I hope you have time to work your way through it. There's a lot of meat on these bones, so you may kind of run out of time, but I hope you can muscle through it all and get through all 3 waves of Matthew 6, because there's some significant stuff in here. And again, very, very important with what we're going to hear our preacher talk to us about Sunday. There are a lot of things that we possess, and many of those things, Jesus is going to say, hey, let me have it and let me use it. Just like the little boy with the loaves and the fishes. Jesus is going to say, can I have that? And we need to be open-handed and say, yeah, Jesus, you take it and you use it. But the only way we'll find ourselves doing that is if we don't prioritize that stuff above all things. All right? So hopefully this group lesson will help us break down our prioritization of things that shouldn't be at the top of the list. All right? Hey, thanks for listening along. I hope this has been helpful to you. And I look forward to seeing you Sunday. God bless you.